everyone. Welcome to the second day of Tech Under 20 Expo. If you weren't here for the first day, we'll just go over a couple of things about the event before we dive in. So we'll be having our talks and panels streamed on YouTube, and in the description box, you'll find a link to the breakout rooms at the scheduled times, time permitting. And note that the breakout sessions are opt-in, not opt-out. So we're having these networking sessions in a separate Zoom call that you can join only if you'd like to, and if not, that's completely fine, but we definitely encourage you to join, as you'll get the chance to meet other students and speakers. And part of the fun in going to conferences is bumping into new people and starting to talk to them. So we did try to include this element into Expo, albeit virtual this year, but we do hope that you take part in it. And we will be sending constant updates in Discord whenever we're coming back to this stream or moving on to a different Zoom call. But for now, we're just going to start off with a quick icebreaker for us this afternoon. We'll have about 3 to 4 people in each room, about 4 minutes. So if you just want to head over to the Zoom link, and we'll see you there. Alrighty, so to kick off our day, we have our keynote speaker, co-founder of the Knowledge Society, Nadeem Nathu. TKS is a human accelerator that focuses on exponential technologies like artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality, nanotech, and more. So his mission at TKS is to develop young people from ages 13 to 17 to pioneer new industries using emerging tech and sciences. And prior to that, Nadeem was a management consultant at McKinsey and Company. And he's also done some cool development work all over the world. And he is also an angel investor. So take it away, Nadeem.
Cool. So my goal today is for you to leave this conversation or for you to leave this talk and change your behavior. Like, what can you do differently after you hear what I have to say? But the one thing that I want you guys to ask yourself before I get started is, what is your mentality when you're listening to me right now? I know it's super difficult, or it's not as easy to be engaged since we're not in person, but there's only so much I can do. So like, I can provide the content and try and be as engaging as I can. But for you, would really encourage you to think about, okay, if you start disengaging, how can you snap yourself back in? What do you expect to get from this talk? Like, what is your best case scenario? Are you just showing up and hoping for me to blow your mind? I mean, that might happen, but you know, are you looking for particular things? Are you taking notes? If I say something, are you like, okay, like, let me think about that a little bit more, right? And so would encourage you to figure out how you can have an active mindset versus just be a passive observer, if that makes sense. Okay, so I wanted to start just by introducing myself, talking about a little bit about my background and the why I started TKS, and I think that'll get into some of the stuff that you guys are facing today. And I'm approaching this talk with the frame of mind that you guys want to solve really important problems in the world. So that's what it's going to be centered around. And how can you maximize your probability to actually solve these really important problems in the world? So, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Calgary, oil and gas town, no historical appetite for innovation. But fast forward, ended up working at multi-billion-dollar companies, advising CEOs from around the world, investing in companies, got into the blockchain space fairly early on. So how the heck did that happen? So, I went to Western, went to Ivy, blah, 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 all that stuff, worked at McKinsey. As I mentioned, I was in like Japan, Australia, working with some of the top CEOs around the world on some of their most salient issues. But that wasn't the most interesting part. I would say that's the easy stuff. That's the thing that everyone does. Where I think my most interesting experiences came from, the things that really shaped who I am today, was a lot of the development work that I did. Growing up, I always had my North Star, my driving force was this deep desire to serve. I wanted to impact a lot of people. And so, I would do a lot of volunteer stuff, and I would just I was in all the extracurriculars doing all the things. But again, it was Calgary, so there was nothing really there. And so when I left for university, I just decided to make my own opportunities. So I would do things like, so in first year, I got exposed to something called the Grameen Bank, which is a microfinance institution started by Muhammad Yunus. The goal is, how do you get people out of ultra poverty? I was really excited about it. This guy won a Nobel Peace Prize. So I just sent him an email, right? And I was like, hey, can I come work for you in Bangladesh? And I was super naive. I didn't even know where Bangladesh was on a map, right? I was just like, I want to work with this guy. Microfinance sounds cool, super impulsive, do it. I did the classic, email him 5 times. Someone got back to me. I was like, okay, can I come work for you? Here's a proposal. They're like, okay, fine. I was like, can you pay for my housing? They're like, okay. I was like, can you pay for my flight? They're like, okay, yeah, but that's it. I was like, all right, cool. That's all I need, right? So I get there. Super powerful experience. Taught me a lot about gratitude. It's probably one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world. But again, a really powerful experience that shaped my perspective on what the world is actually like. To give you guys some context, it's easy to forget what the world is actually like in North America, but the world that we live in right now is not the reality, okay? We live in a bubble. The reality is the rest of the world. So if you think about the Western world or the developed world, if you take Canada and the US, that's 30 million plus 350 million, just say that's 400 million. You take Japan, that's 100 million, so that's 500 million. You take all of Western Europe. That's just say that's 1 billion people, so that's 1.5 billion. Australia is negligible, whatever. Literally, the rest of the world is developing, right? So that's 6.5 billion people who are living in not energy rich, not health rich, and not education rich environments. And so for me, it was really about that experience was super important for gaining a global context versus trying to solve my little problems that we're facing day to day. I was in places like Tajikistan building early childhood development centers. I was in Kyrgyzstan helping build a $250 million university. East Africa teaching business case courses. Honduras built a mobility aid for the physically disabled. And by the way, all of these opportunities I made for myself. Okay, I wasn't like I didn't apply for a program or whatever. I was like, oh, this is an opportunity that I've discovered, and I'm just going to figure out how to make it happen. I want to figure out how I can add unique value to these situations. So I think those were some of the most important parts of my personal development to get me a better perspective on the world. I think at the end of this conversation, if you remember any two things, like say you forget everything, remember these two things. You should have two priorities. Your first priority is get a better understanding of yourself. The second priority is to get a better understanding of the world. If you can do those two things, you'll be able to hack life. Okay? Forget about all this stuff that everybody else says you should do. Get a better understanding of yourself, better understanding of the world. And so for me, those experiences were really important for both to really understand who I am and understand what the world is truly like. Then I mentioned I got involved in the blockchain space fairly early on. If you guys don't know what blockchain is, it's kind of like the Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, Ethereum type things. Moved down to San Francisco. Now, at the same time, my brother started a company, an AI company that ended up getting acquired by Box.com, and he was leading their AI and machine learning team down in Silicon Valley. And it's funny because when he first started the company, neither of us have a technical background, right? When he first started the company, he didn't even know the difference between a designer and a developer. Like he paid a designer $15,000 to develop his backend. 4 years later, he's the head of AI at a multi-billion-dollar company, right? And so one of the key lessons there, and we'll talk about this again throughout my talk, is the only way to achieve unconventional success is to follow an unconventional path. You can't expect to do the same thing as everybody else and achieve a different result. And a lot of the times you guys, or even just young people in general, think you're doing something different, but you're doing something different compared to the people who are in your environment, in your bubble. But the rest of the people who are curious, ambitious, and they're willing to put in the work around the world, they're doing other things. They're taking more risks. They're being more unconventional. But it's tough to know what that is, again, in our little bubbles. And so exposure is really important. Anyway, so once we were down in Silicon Valley, we thought we were going to find a bunch of smart people working on hard problems. And while there's definitely pockets of that, what we also found was a lot of smart people working on dumb problems, like Uber for bartenders or Yelp for dog food. And by the way, those are both very real examples of incredibly smart people who raised millions and millions of dollars to solve those problems. So that was one thing that we realized, okay? That the basic premise of there's not enough smart people in the world working on hard problems. And that's for two reasons. One, the smart, capable people, there's a lot of smart, capable people who are working on problems that aren't important. And then the second is we're not intentionally training people how to maximize their potential, right? You see a 16-year-old kid, maybe like yourself, if you're watching, you want to change the world, you're super ambitious, you want to have a lot of impact. And then you're 22 sitting at a desk as an accountant being like, what the hell happened, right? And it's not necessarily your quote unquote fault that happened. That's what the system is built for. You got to understand, parents, your friends, school, going to university, all that stuff is built to mitigate risk, not optimize for your success. Okay. So school and parents and all that stuff, most often the mentality is how can you just not mess up versus completely maximize your potential. And that made sense, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, where times are tough and opportunity wasn't there. But I would argue we have more opportunity now than any other time in human history. In fact, this is the most exciting time than any other time in human history. And the reason why I say that is because 100 years ago, what was true 100 years ago was probably true 70 years ago, which was probably true 50 years ago. And what was true 20 years ago was probably true 15 years ago. But what was true 5 years ago is not true today. And what is true today might not be true 2 years from now, because the rate of growth is massive, right? And so I mean, number one, you got to be, not all advice is created equal, right? You got to be very intentional about who you want to get advice from, given the goals that you have. And then the second is that the advice isn't going to hold for a long period of time because things are often changing. And it's funny because 20 years ago, there was this wave of emerging technologies. Like, think about the internet. We're so accustomed to the internet being here, but the internet is new, right? More than half of the people that exist in the world today grew up in a world without the internet. The iPhone is only like 10 years old, right? And so it's hard to really conceptualize the rate of change, but it is absolutely massive. So 20 years ago, we had things like internet, we had mobile, we had satellites, we had planes, right? That was like the wave of technologies. Today, we have AI, quantum, nanotech, gene editing, stem cells, blockchain, VR, AR, you name it, right? And so if you think that there is less opportunity today than before, you're just not paying attention. And you expect it to be easy, but nothing good comes easy, okay? So when you think about yourself, and again, if you want to solve important problems, if you want to have impact, if you want to do something interesting, the rest of the talk is going to be around how we actually get there, right? And tactical things, what tactical things can we do? What frameworks do we need to have? So I'm going to share my screen really quick here. Okay, so this whole thing is going to be around how do we solve important problems? What do we need to do? And hopefully it's going to feel super logical. Okay. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll leave some time at the end. So this is a quote by Steve Jobs. Okay. If you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. The reason why I included this quote is because a lot of you are struggling to figure out your direction. You feel like you're smart, you have capability, you can crush things, but it's like, what is the thing to crush? And part of that is you have to think about it in two ways. Is there something that pulls you? And oftentimes that's vision or curiosity, like whatever the case it is. But then if you don't have that, what is the thing that will push you, right? And what push you might be like necessity as an example. Like, say you're in a situation that is not ideal and you want to get out of that situation. Feeling a problem, like you deeply feeling a problem that you want to solve, right? And so there's like a desired state, a future vision that you want to achieve that you think you can make it happen, or other things pushing you from the back. And oftentimes that can be other people too. But it's really important to understand where desire comes from. And just wanted you guys to think about that. Like, what do you think pulls or pushes you, if anything? And if you don't have that, we probably have to solve that first. There's this other quote here about you must be willing to do things others won't do today to have the things that others won't have tomorrow. And this goes back to the only way to achieve unconventional success is to follow an unconventional path quote, right? It's funny because whenever I do talks and I ask young people, what does success mean to you? Or where do you see yourself in like 40 years, 30, 40 years, right? They're like, I want to be a CEO. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be an inventor. I want to do some crazy things. I want to have a lot of impact. I'm like, okay, cool. What are you doing differently than the person next to you? And there's usually silence. And it's like, okay, well, how are you thinking differently than the person next to you? Because maybe you're young and whatever, and you don't have a lot of opportunity. And it's normally silence. And it's like, okay, well, you got to be able to do other things. And the key component here is understanding your risk profile and your relationship with risk and why risk is important. Okay. There's a quote from this guy. His name is Vinod Khosla. You guys probably won't know him, but he's like Bill Gates status. He's a billionaire. He's the reason why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley. He started a company called Sun Microsystems. Facebook's head office actually in One Hacker Way, which is the address for Facebook's office, used to be Sun Microsystems' office. Okay, so they're a big deal down in Silicon Valley, and now he has like $3 billion venture fund that invests in like moonshot technology. So things are going to change the world. Okay. But anyway, here's what Vinod Khosla says. He says the consequence of mitigating risk makes the prospect of success inconsequential. I'm going to say that again. The consequence of mitigating risk makes the prospect of success inconsequential. So here's what I mean by that. Say here's your baseline. Here's reward. So here's upside and here's your downside, okay? And here's the risk. So if you're mitigating risk, mitigating, the amount of success you can achieve is only here, right? Because the more risk you take, the more reward you can get. So if we're always trying to mitigate risk, the consequence for success or the prospect of success is inconsequential. It's like, so what? So what? We got this little amount of success. And so here's life's greatest arbitrage opportunity that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. And life's biggest secret, in my opinion. Perceived risk is far greater than actual risk. Like what most of you think is risky isn't actually as risky. But reward is proportional to perceived risk because everybody else thinks it's actually risky. So the more you can take risk, if you can increase your risk profile, you will just capture that gap, right? And I think a lot of people confuse the difference between risk and recklessness. And so say you're jumping out of a plane without a parachute. To me, that's not risky, that's reckless. Why is that reckless? Because there's no upside. What do you gain? For something to be risky, it needs to have a proportional upside. And the challenge is whether you're thinking about, taking a different path or being unconventional or starting a company or spending your time on other things that most people aren't spending your time on, a lot of people might give you advice not to do that. And the reason why, it's not that they don't have your best intentions in mind. I think they might. But I think they perceive those actions to be reckless, whereas you perceive them to be risky. And the only thing that's missing is understanding the upside. And so if you're ever talking with parents or teachers at school or friends or whatever, and you have a vision and you feel like you're taking a risk, again, which isn't a bad thing, and they don't understand it, part of it is educating them on the upside. And then say they still think that's the wrong decision to make, that just means your risk profile is a little bit higher than theirs, which is fine. Just because you have a higher risk profile doesn't mean you need to take the risk, but now all of a sudden you're open to a lot more opportunities. Go through all of that to say you will not be able to do things others won't do today, to have things others won't have tomorrow. So pretty much exactly there's this quote, if you don't have a higher risk profile. So I would encourage you to think about that. And then the third quote that I want to share with you guys is there's a difference between interest and commitment. When you're interested in doing something, you only do it when it's convenient. But if you're committed to something, you accept no excuses, you only get results. And this point here is about developing your passion. I hate using the term finding your passion because it seems like you're just going to be walking around, you see your passion on the floor, you're like, oh, let me just pick up my passion, put it in my pocket, and that's it. Like that's not how, you don't find your passion, you develop your passion. It's almost like meeting your best friend. So say you meet your best friend or for the first time, you might not even like them at first, right? But you go through some laughs, go through some cries, you wake up 2 years later and you're like, I think you're my best friend, right? That's what developing a passion is like. Being exposed to something, going deep, having experiences with it, building a relationship with it, coming out on the other side. And the reason why, and part of that is just putting the time and committing to something, building something, getting your hands dirty, doing something hard, raising your personal bar for difficulty, okay? It's like a lot of people say calculus is hard, right? Or like, I'm not good at math or whatever. Calculus is objectively not hard. Everybody has to do it. It can't be hard. You might not be as good at it right now, but objectively, it is not a difficult concept to solve. Building reusable rockets is objectively hard. Building a nuclear fusion reactor is objectively hard, right? These are things that are objectively hard. So I'd encourage you guys to raise your bar for difficulty. Now, the reason why I put all these quotes is that they all map to one central idea. And it's around being an activator, okay? So I think there are a lot of capable people who are working at companies that are solving hard problems. Not enough. I would say, but I mean, there's definitely smart people in the world. But what I would say is that there's not enough activators. The first person who suggests an idea and builds momentum. Okay. And that's what I think you guys should be, is think about how you can find a vision or a problem or something that you want to execute on and start doing it. Okay. Activate something, make something happen. Don't expect for other people to activate it for you. Okay. How can you start on that path to increase the probability in the world that you might get the result that you want? It's still unlikely that you'll achieve it, but at least there's a chance now that you've improved the probability that someone in the world is going to solve it. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning, you guys are here, I presume, because you want to do something big. You want to do something important. You want to have impact, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So logically, there are three things that you can do to make something big happen. So you can invent something or do breakthrough research, right? You can work in an organization that has the resources and mandate that aligns to your vision. I would include politics under this area because people are always like, well, what about politics? Well, yeah, it's included there too. And then the third is starting a company organization. I hope this isn't controversial, right? These are the three things you can do to solve an important problem. Okay, so let's talk about some examples. I mean, Thomas Edison is a very clear example. Inventing the light bulb completely changed the world. And this is what he activated, right? And obviously there were a lot of people figuring out how to improve light bulbs, making new types of light bulbs, incandescent to fluorescent, all that stuff. But who activated that? Arguably Thomas Edison, right? And he's also responsible for the movie camera. So we have movies because of this guy, right? So think about what he was able to activate in the world to create an exciting future. Then there's this guy. Most of you don't know who he is, but his name's Andy Jassy. He is the CEO of AWS, Amazon Web Services. And he was the one who actually identified the problem and requested resources from Jeff Bezos to build AWS. Now, most of you might not know why this is significant. First of all, it solves a major problem for a bunch of organizations where web services and cloud computing and processing and whatever is not their bread and butter. And so now they're able to, leverage this tool to grow their business a lot more effectively. But AWS comprises of 50% of Amazon's net income. Okay. This was a massive thing that Andy Jassy activated and led and is leading to Amazon's massive success. This one idea. Okay. And then, this doesn't need really any introduction, but or for how Google completely changed the world, right? Before Google, libraries, universities, smart people, knowledge was power. And that was really the source of opportunity. Whereas today, I don't know if you guys have heard this quote, but you have 99% of the same information that Elon does just by having access to a smartphone, right? Because you can just Google anything. And so now it's less about having information and it's more about problem solving and what you can do with it. But it's very clear that Google completely changed the trajectory of the world. And what I want you guys to understand is like, okay, well, what are the things that you can activate potentially to change the trajectory of the world, right? If you're working on Uber for bartenders, it's not gonna be that. And so you gotta figure out what is the problem that you wanna solve. But I'll get to that framework in a second. Okay, so these are all examples of people who have dramatically changed the world in each of those different areas. And I just want to give you some context because not everyone has to be the entrepreneur, right? Some people can invent stuff and do research. Some people can work at a company. But even if you're working at a company, it should be a company that has a mandate to impact billions and solve hard problems, not like a Canadian bank or an accounting firm or something like that, right? And like some of you might be thinking, like, banks solve hard problems in accounting. Okay, well then we're just not on the same page in terms of the types of problems that we're trying to solve. And this is just something that I'm passionate about. I'm not trying to extend a value judgment of what you should be focusing on, but this talk for me is for the people who are like, yeah, I want to do something big and impactful. Okay, here are one of the reasons why I think people don't focus on hard problems is because they don't know what they are, right? So I talk about the people who are working on like Uber for bartenders and Yelp for dog food. It's likely the problem they just felt the most saliently. Like maybe they have a dog and they wanted to know. So this is actually the story. There was a guy at Google Brain, which is Google's AI division, which was previously called Google AI, and he was building computer vision architecture. And which, by the way, back then, when you were building computer vision architecture, or if you were building computer vision architecture, you were like a genius. You're like one of the smartest people and leaders in this field. And he had a dog who he clearly loved, and he built a computer vision algorithm to detect how fast the dog could wag his tail as a sign for a review of the food, like whether he enjoyed the dog enjoyed the food. And for me, it's like, man, it's because you're so privileged in life that this is the problem that you got to focus on, again, which is not that person's fault. And so what do we got to do? Well, normally when I go outside and if I ask people, like, what are the top 3 problems you're facing as a civilization? Okay. They might say hunger, poverty, climate change, things like that, right? In my opinion, those aren't problems. Those are outcomes. People are hungry. People are poor. The climate is changing, but why? Like, why are people hungry? Why are people poor? Why is the climate changing? And most people will guess. Like, if I asked you, what is the top contributing factor to greenhouse gas emissions globally? You won't know. You'll probably guess. Okay. And so, if you don't have a good understanding of what the problem is, it's virtually impossible for you to leave everything and figure out how to tackle that problem. But what if you had a list of all of these important problems? And then in that list, you could double click. So, like maternal mortality being one of them. Okay. And you had all the level 2, level 3, level 4 understandings of the problem. And you had all the resources that give you all the data and whatever. So, all this stuff down here is just for materials in a delay in receiving adequate care for maternal mortality. And now all of a sudden, you've broken down the problem into manageable chunks that give you a specific problem to solve, right? So again, you can be really smart, you can be really capable and whatever, but you got to understand what is the specific thing that you're trying to solve. And I think this is the difference between like the Greta Thunberg approach and the Elon Musk approach, right? The Greta Thunberg approach is inspiration first learning. It's something I like to call inspiration first learning. And I don't think it works so well because it's like, hey, everyone, climate change is a problem. We need to solve this. Everybody needs to come together and we need to do something now. And everyone's like, yeah, but what do I do? Right? You don't have an initial hypothesis. Whereas, say, for example, you were looking into AI and you go really deep and you've built some projects and you understand, what the capabilities are. Now, when someone tells you, oh, climate change is a problem because energy storage is an issue. So there's batteries and something called supercapacitors. Supercapacitors have a higher theoretical storage capacity than batteries, but their R&D cycles are very long because there's a lot of data. It's hard to predict the longevity of these supercapacitors. And then you might think, well, what if we can use machine learning to bring this down from 6 months to 3 days? And now all of a sudden, it's not inspiration first learning. You have an intuition, a direction of what you can do immediately to solve the problem. Okay. So very simple. If you want to solve an important problem in the world, you need 2 things, right? You need to identify the problem, and then you need to figure out how to execute. So you need to know how to execute and have intuition on how to execute, right? So if you know the problem and you know how to solve it, you can solve the problem. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. Well, there are 4 things that I think you need to be able to meet these 2 criteria. So I would encourage you to think about what resources you'll need to solve problems, what abilities you need to have, right? What skills, what is the direction you're going to take, and this is the problem that you're likely going to solve, or at least the first step, and then underpinning that is desire. Think about where your motivation or desire is coming from. And I don't think motivation is the best way to go about things. I think there's a difference between inspiration and motivation. Inspiration really comes, like it might come from someone else, but you feel inspired, whereas motivation almost feels like to me someone else or something else is pushing you to do something. And so I'd encourage you to figure out where inspiration lies, or at least if you have motivation, how can you turn that into inspiration? But you got to have a desire. If you don't have a desire, like one of the things that Elon Musk says is if you need words of motivation, don't do it, because that's going to burn out. That's going to die out very quickly. Okay. So under resources, you got to figure out what people and team you need to have, what capital, and what network. Those are really all the resources that you need. Okay. Under ability, you need to think about what frameworks you want to have in terms of your mental models. And then figuring out is more scrappy and hustling and whatever. And then under your direction, you got to figure out the problem that you want to solve. So this is some of the stuff that we talk about in TCAS and some of the things that we train, right? Is like best practices, hiring, like these are the skills that you got to figure out on top of whatever technical competency or problem or thing that you want to build right now. But at the end of the day, what you should be training, in my opinion, is these things. And you need to be training how to problem solve, how to just figure it out, do stuff, build things. Because when you build things, there's an end goal. It's not about all the things that you're interested in on your quote unquote resume or whatever. But if you have stuff that you've done, if you've had stuff that you've built and you struggled through it, well, then you're going to come out on the other side and feel like a lot of these things are a lot more manageable. But I would say this is the framework of things that you should build in yourself. And then I know we're running out of time, but the last thing that I would say is be courageous. Like have the courage to make a change. If anything that I said resonated with you, well, what's the delta between you feeling like you should be taking an unconventional path or doing something different versus actually doing it? It is the courage to be able to do the things that most people don't do. Because the reality is again, you can't just do the same things as other people. So whether you want to reprioritize your time, whether you want to work on some of these things, solve a super ambitious problem, or at least start tackling it, whatever the case it is, or it is going to take a level of courage to be able to do it. And at this point, you just got to ask yourself, what type of person do I want to be? Do I want to be the type of person who just stays on a very traditional and regular path? And again, I'm not assigning a value judgment to that. That's fine. Like the world needs that. But again, this talk isn't for those people. This talk is for the people who want to optimize for success versus mitigate risk. This talk is for the people who want to maximize their potential versus kind of be stuck in a box, because I think that's what we need more people in the world to do. And there's a ton of existing infrastructures that help with the former, but there's actually not a lot of infrastructures. Like there's not a specific institution in the world that trains people to solve important problems. We feel like that should make sense, right? Like imagine the Olympics didn't exist. How many 14-year-olds would wake up one day and be like, you know what? I want to dedicate the rest of my life to being super fast in the water. No one's going to do that, right? But the Olympics provides the intention, the facilities, the people, whatever. And so if you want to solve really important problems, you got to figure out how you can build that for yourself. I mean, TCAS is one place to do that, but you don't need TCAS, right? Like you can figure out what are some of those things, mentors, environments, whatever you need to be in to be able to follow that path and reach that trajectory. And the interesting thing that I think about is like, imagine there was a king or queen of the world and their main goal, their main KPI, which stands for a key performance indicator. It's like their main goal is to improve quality of life for all their royal subjects. And say they had a list every week, they got a list of all the things that were adversely affecting quality of life, right? So you have mental health, poverty, climate change, all those things. And imagine them looking at this list and being like, actually, I'm just going to let my royal subjects figure out the answers to all these problems without any help and without even being able to see this list. That sounds weird, right? But that's the world today. And it just sounds like what that person would do is be like, okay, we have these really awesome people, we have this problem, let's put them together and get them to solve it. And so again, that is just not the way the world works. And so instead of waiting for systems to be able to apply it to you, if you think you're a capable, high potential person, you got to figure out how to either build those systems or create those environments for yourself. And so hopefully that was helpful. Didn't mean to go super over time, but happy to answer any questions you guys have if we have time for that.
Thanks, Nadeem, so much for that keynote. You're a great speaker. Made me chuckle at times, and that was very insightful. So hopefully it got some people thinking differently. Everyone, please make sure to check out TKS. They do some really cool stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but if anybody ever has anything they want to ask him, feel free to ask it in the general channel, and maybe he'll stick around and answer those and type in some answers for you guys. Alrighty, so for our next segment, especially during, a global pandemic. A lot of people have risen up and started organizations, initiatives, and startups to support individuals in need. So our next panel features three people that are interested in enacting social change and creating impact on the world. So we're excited to welcome Daniel Francavilla, Anish Verma, and Graham Hill. So if you guys would turn on your cameras, we can get started.
The host needs to enable us to open our videos.
Okay, let me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, it looks like.
Hey, Anish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. It's always happy to. I suppose should we get started, or should we wait
Looks like
for
one of
Daniel?
our panelists are just having a little bit of difficulty connecting. Hmm.
I'm here. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. No worries.
It looks like Daniel has the superhero pose there in his picture. I like that.
Yeah. All right, I'm here.
Alrighty. So, all right, so we can get started now. Why don't we just start off with a quick introduction? We can start with an introduction of your projects and some big things that you guys are proud of, along with like what you've done in the past. We can start with Daniel.
Okay, so my name is Daniel, as you guys know. I have a couple of different initiatives. The main one is my company, which is called Now Creative Group. That's an agency that I started about 7 years ago now. And we focus on marketing and branding and social media with a lot of social good based companies and nonprofit organizations. And also, we also work with a lot of startups in different industries, but our focus really is on impact, making a positive impact through that. And then I also have a nonprofit organization that I started when I was a student back in high school, actually, which has evolved into something that we do every year called the Bright Ideas Pitch, where we actually give out funding, micro grants to help youth-led organizations who are starting their own nonprofit for some type of social good or social impact. So that's my main focus.
Very nice, yeah. And then we can go on to Graham, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. And Daniel, I'll send you some requests for some funding shortly, because that's what we do in the charity world, right? Yes. My name's Graham Hill. I'm the executive director at Food for Life. So we are a food rescue charity. Have been serving Halton and Hamilton and areas beyond for the last 25 years. Every year we rescue and share about 4.5 million pounds of food. So good quality surplus food. And we move that through a really unique supply chain that's comprised of well over 100 different charities and nonprofit partners. And each have their own different modality for getting food out and the other different service provisions that they may offer to individuals who are requiring food supports. And we primarily focus on fresh, healthy eating. So we rescue from the back of grocery stores, farmers, producers, wholesalers. Myself, I've been in the charitable sector now for about 25 years. And before that I was an entrepreneur as well. But again, fell in love with the social side, the social good. And at Food for Life, we're transitioning. We've been doing this for a number of years as a natural output. And I just remember the last speaker was talking about risk tolerance. As we can see with things like the We Charity and those types of pieces, social enterprise, while well-intentioned, can go off the rails. But it doesn't have to be national in scope or international in scope, right? It can be very local and have really negative detrimental impacts. So we are very careful when we look at our social enterprises, and we have two that are really focused and tied in with our mission, and happy to answer any questions on them. But One naturally came out of the management of food waste. We deal with about 10% waste that we deal with that's inedible for human consumption. So as we look at the food pyramid, it was a natural part for us to look at compost as an initiative. So we have our own on-site large industrial composter running. And then the other part is turning large bulk institutional food that we rescue into an edible product. Because you can imagine a 50-pound turkey isn't easy to give out to an average family. Most people don't have an oven to fit it, and it's just too large to distribute. So we started a social enterprise called the Good Soup Initiative, and currently working with our partners at United Way and an advisory council and MyTax through DeGroot and McMaster to make that dream a reality. So those are all active projects that are happening.
Very interesting stuff. Yeah, food waste and that stuff, it's definitely something that we definitely need to start being more conscious about. And Anish, would you like to introduce some of the stuff that you're doing?
Sure. So hello everyone. My name is Anish. I do a few things, but of relevance to this talk is my work with STEM Fellowship. So I am currently the Chief Data Officer for a national charity called STEM Fellowship, and the STEM Fellowship has a few different programs, but in short, we aim to empower youth in STEM. We have a variety of programs that are aimed to help marginalized groups, for example, women, the indigenous, as well as minorities in STEM in Canada and North America, broadly speaking. Uh, the main initiative that I help run is the Big Data Challenge program, in which we try to teach both at the high school and undergraduate levels data science and its applications in the real world. You know, because I feel that the word big data has been thrown around by pretty much everyone over the last few years, but really, you know, what does that mean, and are we able to apply it, and are students able to apply it at a young age? And the answer to all those questions and more is a resounding yes. So we've this past year in particular with COVID, we've had to completely rework our infrastructure just in general, because everything's online now. And as Graham was saying with a different topic, a small perturbation can make everything go awry, you know. But in spite of the pandemic, we were able to grow our competition, our program into by almost double in every metric or so. So we were really happy. And this year in particular, because of the pandemic, we focused on how data science can be applied to address public health issues. And you know, we saw some really interesting work that I would love to talk about. But in short, that is what we here at STEM Fellowship do, and what I have done over the last or over my time with the organization.
Thank you so much for coming here to talk with us about your stuff that you're doing. It's all very interesting stuff. Hopefully we'll get to hear a lot more. So first of all, what got you guys interested in social impact, and you know, what sort of motivations or experiences made you sort of want to do stuff like this? Daniel, we can start with you. Oh, you're muted.
My involvement first started back in high school when I was involved in a number of different initiatives through my schools, whether it be through, you know, social justice club or student council, all these different initiatives that kind of really got me interested and inspired to learn about what was happening in the world. And so as a result of that, I went on a trip in high school to the Dominican Republic. It was something called an exposure trip. And the goal of this trip was specifically to learn what life is like in developing countries, which is actually, you know, if you grew up just here in Canada, the majority of the world does live on far less means per day than we do here. So I was really exposed to, you know, what poverty looks like in the developing countries, and what systems are kind of causing these issues. And I learned that education was a real barrier for the youth there that I met. And so what we did was, when I came back, I was inspired to take some type of action, and I did a collection through my community, through different schools and the whole community in Brampton for school uniforms, because they told us that, if they didn't have uniforms or shoes, for example, they couldn't actually get into school. So I thought that was a very easy or simple solution. So in starting that collection, it led to the creation of Access, which again has been a nonprofit for the last 14 years. And what we have done since then is we've actually gotten grants, grant funding from a couple of different places to run programs with the goal to inspire other youth to kind of take action and solve these issues that the world faces. So it really was that firsthand experience of seeing and meeting people that were experiencing the challenges that got me inspired to take action. And I will say that when I started my company, my agency, it led to me being socially conscious and wanting to have a social purpose in my agency and my marketing business. Because again, it's a for-profit company, but everything we do is to accelerate positive change, right? And really help nonprofit organizations and social enterprises thrive. So all from that one trip in grade 10 in high school that kind of set this path.
Yeah, there are times where I guess one thing can impact you, and then you just decide a lot of things just from one experience. Very cool.
Exactly.
And Anish, would you like to go next and talk about some of what got you into this?
Sure, happy to. So really, how I got started into into social impact in STEM is it really stems from my own education, right? So in my undergrad studies, I studied physics, right, and even now into my graduate studies, still studying physics. But over those years, I really noticed that although there were a lot of small initiatives that were aimed towards like fostering a community and helping these marginalized groups, but there wasn't really anything at the national level, at least not successfully, quite frankly. And I feel that I'm able to speak from this from experience, because I would see my peers who came from similar backgrounds as myself and just were not succeeding because they didn't necessarily have the same tools or the same footing that other better off students may have had, which is really unfortunate. And I really felt that in order to sort of bridge this gap, more initiatives needed to be taken, which is why I took on this sort of initiative at STEM Fellowship, right? So I really wanted, I had that drive. I really wanted to make sure that we could build a stronger community where everyone had that equal footing, right? And for me, that comes in the form or two forms really. One is providing free and equal access to to everyone through virtual means, right? And the second was to actually host competitions in which everyone could compete against each other on an equal footing. Because I really do believe that in science in general, you learn not just by having these resources, but by being pushed to the bleeding edge of what is being done. So yes, in short, my passion and my drive for social impact in STEM really came from just seeing, well, seeing the sort of pitfalls that students and minorities will experience in the field.
That's fair, yeah, for sure. And Graham, would you like to talk about that? How did you get started with Food for Life?
Wow. Well, that's a whole other one.
Okay. Or we
I'll
can
come
make it
back
more
to
general. What got you into more of this side of
yeah.
organizations?
Really more the social impact side. And Anish, I may get this wrong, so correct me, but there's a principle in physics, and maybe specifically astrophysics, but called Heidelberg's theory, and it's the and/or principle. And what drove me was having been an entrepreneur and had saw the power of business and the good that companies could do with business, whether it was with an owner or whether it was with a corporation, when social purpose was included as a metric, not just an output, but it was a key part of the fabric of the organization. And where I was immersed in that was I grew up with a family in Newmarket, and that the father had an accounting firm. My high school partner, my friend Brad, His dad had the accounting firm, and they had very strong social purpose values built into their business operations. And they were built in on a daily basis, and they weren't done from an operations lens for improved marketing. They were done because they strongly felt that the only way to better the community was to reinvest in the community. And that it had to be done purposeful, and it had to be done on a consistent basis, not just a once a year check. So they looked at everything from employee engagement, volunteer hours, all this stuff before it was trendy. So when I got into business, I had that kind of sitting in the back of my mind. And then you go in, and then you saw the separation where charities weren't seen as businesses. Yet they are. They're legally a registered business, same as a nonprofit. And there are differences there, as we all know. But then you have this whole social enterprise piece where all of a sudden for charities to be profitable or to expand into different areas, they had to start a business. And what was that going to take us down? And what was different about that? And in fact, most charities were already operating social enterprises. They just weren't a separate entity. So, whether it's you have the Salvation Army that hadn't have a soup kitchen in it, right? So they kind of had these social enterprises already happening. And then as things started to grow and it became trendy to put a name to it, they started to get calved off and run different pieces. So, when we looked at ours at Food for Life, and I strongly believe this, is that there is this marriage. I think B Corps will help get us there a little bit further, but even that still has still that little bit of that corporate feel to it, where people are still not sure 100% where the accountability lies at the end of the day. But at least at the end of the day, the profits are purposeful to go back to social purpose. But there's still the accountability, liability, ethics that go with that. So I think we're getting closer. It's not perfect, but it's getting closer. And that's what really drives us. So when we looked at our social enterprises, we wanted stuff that was mission driven and enhanced the work that we did, and that didn't cause any mission drift. And I'm a strong believer that charities have a lifespan. We're owned by the public. We're here to serve a purpose. And once that purpose is fulfilled, close down the charity. And please, if I can inspire anyone, don't start another charity. Start another conversation. And if you're not getting the conversation that you want about STEM, and Anish can't fill your needs, ask Anish, hey, Anish, you can't fill my needs. Is there another STEM organization? And once you've exhausted all that, if that's the only time that you're like, wow, there's something that's not doing X to achieve this purpose, then start a charity. It's far too easy to start a charity, and we just get diluted. We get board member dilution. We don't get good governance. We don't get the proper skills and investments that are at the table. And by diluting that, we're actually diluting impact. And what it really matters is the starting of the conversation. And the past speaker that was on, mentioned something about that, being comfortable with your risk profile. I strongly encourage anyone that if you're looking at getting into a social enterprise, please don't confuse personal profit, personal job security, and social purpose. They are distinctly different, and really they don't meet. So you want to think of this as whatever entity you're starting needs to transcend you if it's a good idea, right? It's not just there to fill your own personal purse. It's there to actually benefit the public at large. And these are people that you may never meet. And that's the whole intent. Mm-hmm. So that's what inspires us to do this and to do it right, is to fill that need now and hopefully be redundant in the future and be able to drift away.
That was a very insightful piece, Graham. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
a lot of, yeah,
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, one thing to emphasize from that is for people who are considering starting something, the goal of a charity or a nonprofit is to not have to exist, because the goal is that you've solved the problem that you're out there to solve, right? So, and I always talk about collaboration over competition, and I talk about this especially with students who are looking to start something. So I love what you said there.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. That's wise words coming from a yellow screen.
Alrighty. And so a lot of charities or nonprofit organizations, often a barrier is monetary. So what ways do grants and funding, what are the primary ways that of that they get used primarily to overcome, like what are the barriers that are used for things like these?
So I can jump in and say that obviously there's different types of funding available. A lot of funding when you're in a new organization is for a specific program or event, right? And it's kind of it's timed where there's just one deliverable, one event, one initiative, and that's great because if that project is successful and you set up your metrics for your KPIs, you can then pursue another project, right? Or you can look for a larger grant. There's other funding that's more longer term and that helps with operations. And again, one of the only ways to do that is to be able to show that you're able to, sustainably execute on programs and meet those goals. There's types of funding that comes obviously from the government. There's a lot of big corporations that have funding that they give out as well, or you can apply for. And then there's foundations that their main job, their whole existence is to fund organizations. Right now, there's one specifically that's called the Investment Readiness Program. So anyone who's interested in social entrepreneurship will definitely look into this one because the goal is to give you between $10,000 to $100,000 to test out or to prove your business model as a social enterprise. The whole point of it is to create a way to determine if your organization is investment ready. So they give you this funding over the course of a year, and then you can use that and leverage that to then apply for larger types of funding. So those are just a few examples. And then of course there's private investment, which is, individuals giving you money, investing for a share of equity or for a share of the profits. But for the most part, there's a lot of grant funding available.
Interesting. Do any of you have anything to add that's like particularly different, or we can talk about next? People are curious, like what would you say to somebody that wants to create some kind of social change but don't necessarily know how to start? A lot of students, it seems like they want to start like a new organization or a charity, but often, that might not be the way to go. So what would you say to a student that wants to do something but doesn't know where to start?
Can I jump in on that one, Anish?
Yeah,
Are
for
you okay
sure.
with that? Yeah, I let's separate church and state for a second. What I mean by that is, let's talk about charity first, and then let's start about social enterprise, right? And I'll divide them into two because Daniel just brought up a great point about private investment. And I look at, and I'll give a shout out to a really amazing technology firm in Burlington called Tip Tap Pay. It's Chris Greenwood's group, lovely group. They've just been getting some angel investing. They have developed a very quick programmable tap technology that the Salvation Army, we've used to drive donations. That is a social enterprise. Yes, it's targeted to help social purpose organizations like us, but they're also looking at how do they use this on transit systems, on those other. That is a social enterprise, private investment, risk reward, equity yield type dialogue. When you come into a charity, you can offer none of that. So the only shareholders of the organization are officially the members of the organization. And I'm not talking broad-based membership, but those who are defined as the voting members of the organization. Board members cannot be compensated, except for obviously expenses that are within the scope and confines, but there's no compensation. Whereas on a social enterprise board, there could be compensation, right? You could be bringing people in for skills, no different than a regular corporation. If you're a social B Corp, then there's limits on that as well and different parameters. But so that does determine something that Daniel talked to a little bit about funding and where do you go. So something like the Investment Readiness Program is a hybrid, right? So you could have a great company like the creative team, right? They, creative group that Daniel starts, and that could say be a social B Corp that does creative branding, marketing, and the social purpose profits are to keep continuing to fund that mission in Dominican, to keep that dream, that inspiration, and make that happen. that is a private company that's doing charitable work, right? That's that piece. If I look at niche with the STEM project, oh, that's a charity. Now, you don't have a board of directors that is getting paid or remunerated. So the investment readiness program could invest and say, hey, but wait, we have such a good learning program here that we want to divest that and make that accessible, no different than a private tutoring company where we can train your kid at home and the profits from that are going to come back and feed the mission. So, right, no one's generating profit. Same concept. It's the generation of profit. It's just where it's going. And I think that needs to be really clear, because the other part that is actually limiting to charities, unlike the private sector, is that ability sometimes to recruit the best talent to help guide those investments, and also attract those investments. Because for some people who have amazing, amazing skills, they may want a cut of whatever that benefit may be for their investment of time, energy, intellectual property, right? All those wonderful gifts and skills. Whereas with a charity, the only benefit is to see the return on investment for that societal purpose that charity exists for, right? That's it. And for some people, that's enough if they're more altruistic. And for other people, it's like, hey, if I'm going to give you this, I want X. So it does put binders on a charity from that standpoint, where we can be, and we typically are actually more resilient and creative within our scopes and confines and limited resources than the for-profit sector, right? Like we really are, when you look at the skills that are in there, but we actually have the challenge of this limited pool of funds. And Daniel, you talked about this, which was the idea of tied and untied, or restricted and unrestricted. Everyone talks about impact. And quite often, as a charity, you could get a $100,000 grant, but 5% of that may only be allowed to be used for administration. So you may have the best activity in the world, but you actually need a person to run it, but you can't pay them $5,000 a year, right? Like it just, so we end up with these ideological challenges that are kind of perpetuated with society. So more and more foundations, some other funders are recognizing that and loosening those chains. But that's still definitely a benefit for social enterprise. So I would say, if someone was coming out, and I shared this earlier, I covered my eyes when you talked about it, but if someone's coming out and they want to make a social change, maybe they're inspired to do more coding, like Rhea Somani, one of our great volunteers and a participant in Tech Under 20, or the Preppy group that we're working with on our online learning system that we're part of the Tech Under 20 group as well. You know, I say to them, I say, look, have that look and say, what can I do now to get this on my resume to build my product in the future? I get to do social good now, use my skills now, and then I can launch that off into something that you know, maybe drives a career, right? Or another social purpose. But if it's something truly that you want to stay in the public domain, have the conversation. Connect with an Anish, connect with a Daniel, connect with a me, connect with your local charity, and have the conversation and figure out, how can I use my skills to help, right? Because most charities don't want to be around. We don't want to exist, right? We don't want to have this purpose, right? We want to solve that problem, like Anish said.
And just to cut in, since sorry, just to cut in, since we're talking about, you know, for students wanting to get into a charitable cause or starting their own organizations, as Graham was mentioning, there's so many pitfalls, especially when it comes to money, right? It really defines like what you are able to do, right? The talent that you're able to bring in, and it's so unfortunate, because again, like Graham was saying, you really need a good mix of those who are altruistic and willing to give their time and skills to some sort of cause for effectively free, right? Now, in terms of actually getting funding, there are even more barriers, because certain organizations that give funding require that you can't work with, you know, for their competing organizations, right? And you know, then you start to run into the worry of like, okay, if I start to take if I get into a partnership with this organization, it will prevent me from working with another one in the future, and will that just, you know, hurt my cause at the end of it? And I've seen cases where some organizations don't take funding at all from these sorts of organizations, but it limits them even further because of this. and again, it's just an unfortunate reality.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the point I want to get across is that when starting your own organization or wanting to get into these causes, you really need to be aware of the scope of things. Otherwise, your project, may not be able to get its own feet off the ground. Um, and going back to what Daniel was saying, it really helps to start off with those small sorts of grants that you can apply for, right? Even something as small as a $500 grant, because you can use those to leverage yourself and your organization going forward, right? Because unfortunately, money makes the world go around. And when investors and granting organizations see that you have successfully made grant or gotten grants before, it really helps your case going forward. And you can leverage those $500 grants into $1,000 grants, into tens of thousands, and so on and so forth.
Alrighty, that's some great insights, and that was very informative. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end things here. We've let our attendees know if they have questions, they can post them into the social impact channel. So if there are questions and you'd like to answer, feel free to let them, I don't know, give them a reply. But thank you so much for talking about your endeavors, and you're all doing some really great things. Keep it up. Alrighty, so next we'll have Dr. Don Stewart. He is, sorry, all right, thank you guys. So he is the CEO of Plantform Corporation, and he's an entrepreneur and scientist with 30 years experience in the biotechnology industry. So today he'll be talking about health tech, his company, and how Plantform is helping to combat COVID-19. So Don, if you have slides to share, I believe you're able to share your screen and you can take it away.
Okay, great. Let's start like that. Is that good?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, I'll put it up full screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it was very interesting discussion there about getting seed funding to start organizations. When we started this company, we went a bit bigger. Our first grant was $145,000, and we moved on from there, for better or for worse. So our company is called Plantform Corporation, and we're in this sort of time today. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about our company, tell you about some of the things we've changed since the end of February, early March, and responding to and adapting to COVID. And I'm very happy to answer any questions if we've got time now or online later, or drop me a text or an email. I'm happy to do that. So it's an interesting quote here from Bill Gates from 3 years ago, that bioterrorism is a bigger risk than a pandemic. And at that time, no one was considering there would be a pandemic, viral disease across the world. But we have actually moved into both the areas of dealing with terrorist threats and also more recently COVID. So what we do as a company is we develop and produce drugs and also diagnostic agents. And we do this using tobacco plants. There's a nice irony here, because one of our first products that we were working on was a drug for cancer, actually for breast cancer, and we were using tobacco as a way of mitigating breast cancer. The system's called Vivo Express, like it means live and fast. And what we're doing is we're developing drugs as countermeasures to terrorist threats. And I'll talk a little bit about our lead candidate, but the idea here is that governments stockpile drugs so that they're ready to deal with an event. And in the US, typically they have 2 doses for people in a football stadium, so it's designed around about 100,000 people, and also 50,000 other first responders who might be exposed. So, they're accumulating 300,000 doses, perhaps sometimes a lot more, of drugs. We also work on developing low-cost versions of drugs, which are copies of existing drugs, and these are directed at emerging markets. Our system is not only fast at producing drugs, but it does it at very low cost. And so there's a lot of interest in trying to make expensive drugs available in emerging markets, and also reduce the cost in first world markets, so that there's a lower burden of cost to healthcare systems. And we can actually manufacture drugs down to 10% of the cost of current manufacturing methods. And then more recently, what we've done is we've responded to COVID, both developing drugs for COVID and developing test kits. Um, so our company is set up originally in Guelph. This is our founder here, Dr. Chris Hall, who was a professor at the university and developed the technology. I'd known him actually since the mid-80s, when we both worked in Alberta at the University of Alberta, and we used to ski together. And we decided with another gentleman, Dr. Mark Goldberg, to set up this company to bring Chris's technology out of the university and into a practical application. So the company licensed the technology from the university. And since then, we've secured about 10 million in investment and another 10 million in grants and contracts. And we've become, even though we're a small number of people, we're only about 20 people, we are quite an international company, operating from bases in Ontario, but stretching out over different parts of the world. The core value of the company is the technology, so we protect it with patents. And we have patents stretching out actually 20 years from now. There's a series that we have 6 different families of patents, about 25 under review and 9 issued patents right now. So the main things we're working on is the COVID projects, and we're also working on the financing to advance some of our projects and build a manufacturing facility, most likely here in Ontario. The way this system works is you grow the tobacco in what are called vertical farming systems. And this is one made by a company we're quite closely working with called Inno3B, who are from Quebec. The plants are grown in trays. You can see them up the sides. They grow about 15 inches high. So this is not smoking tobacco. It's a different type of tobacco called Nicotiana benthamiana that originated in Australia. It's a wild plant, one of the 59 different types of tobacco. It grows really well indoors. We use LED lighting, hydroponics, and we control temperature, humidity, and pump in carbon dioxide. And you can see in the lower picture there that it's a multi-layer system, about 10 layers of plants, and you can have larger and smaller devices to work it. There's a computerized lift system in the middle that moves the trays around, and a large number of data points. One of the biggest challenges you have with these systems is actually deciding what data to use. It's very easy to collect data, but it's much harder to know exactly how to define that and what's going to be useful in control and development of new processes. These systems are scalable, and this shows the way you would set up in a large-scale manufacturing facility. And you can produce millions and millions of doses of drugs and vaccines. There's a company in Quebec City, a different one from the one we're working with, but a big company called Medicago, who are developing vaccines with this type of system for COVID. And they're looking at producing between 30 and 40 million doses next year to support vaccination in Canada. So it's quite an adaptable, cheap process, and brings a benefit to the people who are needing drugs and applications. So just to give you an idea of how this works, this is a little diagram. We grow the plants, the Nicotiana benthamiana, for 4 weeks from seeds. And just before the end of that time, we grow an agrobacterium, which is a type of bacteria that only infects plants. And we have inserted into the plants the genetic material that will change what the tobacco is doing from being a normal tobacco plant to actually producing the drug of interest. So it's sort of like a little bioreactor that we let it grow, and then we put in the genes, and in the next week, it'll actually produce the product. So we introduce the gene by infiltration. It's a vacuum system, and then we do grow the plants for 1 more week. So that whole process takes 5 weeks, and then we extract the drug in 1 day using standard processes from the pharmaceutical industry. We purify it. It takes about 4 days, and then it can be filled into vials. So a total process of about 6 weeks, which is very short for the production of a pharmaceutical substance. So what we've done is we've applied this to therapeutic drugs and diagnostics. We also have a program on veterinary vaccines. That's a collaboration with Agriculture Canada, dealing with a problem in pigs. And we do specialty protein production under contract. So quite a range of opportunities for the company. And that has attracted the investor interest. So our lead product is actually the antidote to ricin. So ricin is a toxic material, the second most toxic compound in the world after botulinum toxin, and it's made from a house plant. Actually, it's quite easy to make from castor bean plants. So it can be used, it can be weaponized, which means it could be distributed into like this idea of a football stadium, and it's readily, easily made. So there has been cases in the US where it was sent to US senators and also to the White House. There was a powder inside an envelope with a letter in it. And if you got that, touched it, and put it in your mouth or your eye, it would be fatal within 4 days. There's been a number of people caught making these drugs, well, not drugs, the poison. And there's actually quite a lot of information about people making these terrorist cells that's not in the public domain. But because we're working with Defence Canada and 3 other governments, we have been advised about this information, and it's some ways quite scary, but it's also good that the Canadian government has been a leader in developing an antidote. So what we're doing is we're creating an antidote to this poison called ricin. It's actually a drug that's known as an antibody. And the one we have, which was developed by Canadian Department of Defence and we've now licensed, is the best drug that's been developed anywhere in the world, that's been shown in animal studies. And we have patents covering that. And you can see here, the potential sales are between 200 to 300 million a year. The investment that we're looking for now, we're looking for between around about 10 to 12 million to bring that product to the point at which it could be used in exposed people. So it's it's actually a very small investment for a drug. There's already been about 50 million invested in this project by governments, by Canada, the US, the UK, and Australia. And so we're able to use that information and bring a benefit both to Canada by having the antidote and also revenue from sales, some of which go to the government as royalties. So it's an interesting project, a little different from normal drug products, but it's a good way of using our system, producing these drugs in low cost. So in terms of the other projects we work on, it has changed this year due to COVID. We have projects in ricin, an antidote to nerve gas, which is a big issue at the moment in Syria. And then we're developing more normal drugs. Lucentis is for a disease of the eye called wet macular degeneration. Herceptin's a breast cancer drug that's on the market, and Keytruda's a drug for multiple myeloma and some types of skin cancers. And we also have this interesting project working on vaccines for pigs. Now, after COVID happened, we did start COVID projects, and I'll talk about the projects we have there in a second, but we also had to stop our Herceptin project, because it was partnered with a company in South Africa. And due to the impact on the economy there, they weren't able to produce the kind of cash flow that was needed to advance the project. So we put that on hold and have put that focus into the area of COVID. So in COVID, it was there was a lot of calls for proposals for projects early on in around about March and April, and we responded in Canada, the US, and in Europe. We now have 3 projects which are running, which are all COVID related. This first one here is what's called a serological test. It's the test that's used in patients who are recovering from COVID. And the technology comes from a partner company in Cape Town in South Africa called Cape Biofarms. And we've partnered with another Canadian company, a university here, and also the government of Brazil, the Ministry of Health there, to bring a test kit into the market. In Brazil, the COVID situation is pretty much out of control. And there's a lot of interest in trying to find tools that will help them understand why that is. We're actually sold some of the material for the test kits to the government there, and it's being tested right now. It's been fairly quick, the development, and we're quite excited by the potential over the next 2 to 3 years from the point of view of our business. We will be paid to manufacture components and also receive a percentage royalty on the sale of kits, which will be in Brazil, Canada, India, and South Africa and other African countries. We've also developed developing new drugs, which are drugs for treatment. These are therapeutics for COVID, and we're partnered in one case with a group in Texas and the University of Alabama in Birmingham, Alabama. This project's funded by NIH NIAID, the National Institutes of Health in the US. And what happens here is the drugs have been pulled out of recovering patients. You can take the genetic information, the mRNA, from a patient who's recovering because they have developed their own antibodies to the virus. And what we do is we recreate those, and we're producing those in our plant-based system. And there's another project as well, which is funded by Department of Defense Canada, which is producing a protein drug. And it's an interesting approach that was developed by a thinking of Department of Defense and the Ministry of Health in Ottawa. And we've been contracted to produce initial batches of this material for testing. So as a company, we operate here in Canada. Plantform is the parent corporation. We've set up a subsidiary company focused on the countermeasures to bioterrorism called Entoxa. And we have a partnership in Rio de Janeiro with a Brazilian pharmaceutical company. The partnership's called Plant Praxis. And then we have our relationship in South Africa, which is a business development partnership with Cape Biofarms. And we're looking at developing other relationships in China and possibly in India at the moment. So in terms of the company here, we're an Ontario company, and before COVID, we had labs and greenhouse space and contained growth space at the University of Guelph and offices in Toronto and Sarnia. But because of the university's position on doing R&D during COVID, we had to move our laboratories, and we've moved our laboratory out of the University of Guelph to another site in Guelph where we rent space, and also in Bolton where we've rented space from a cannabis company whose facility is not being used at the moment. So it's caused some issues in terms of organization, moving equipment, and we have to be very careful that we're coordinated with the activities, growing plants at the university, and then doing molecular biology at a different site in Guelph, and doing biochemistry and other extraction work up in Bolton. So in terms of, if we're looking at what the opportunities are, and this is my last slide here to talk about this in this type of industry, it is a very exciting industry. I have worked in biotechnology since the mid-80s. I joined a company that had 8 employees, and 25 years later, we had 800 employees, and we're doing $250 million in sales. Um, but a company like ours, it starts in the lab. We have laboratory technicians and scientists. That was the initial funding. And then as we obtained more funding, we added project management people, regulatory affairs, and finance and business development. And as we move forward from the stage we are now, which is we're just going to be entering clinical trials next year, we're going to have to expand in terms of establishing a new facility. And that requires engineers, manufacturing operators, but also move the products that we're making into clinical trials. So we'll need people in clinical affairs and quality control, as well as maintaining the other groups. So what quite often happens with people is they'll come into a company like ours, and as a company expands or as they develop a career, you can move from being perhaps a laboratory technician into manufacturing or quality or clinical into the corporate area as well. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I think it's an interesting place to work, interesting projects, particularly in smaller companies. And usually these companies have interesting people working for them as well. So this is our company here, the group when we were all night in Guelph together. And yeah, that's a little summary of who we are and what we do. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. Interesting stuff about what your company is doing during these COVID times as well. Very cool work. So thank you so much. So next we have a workshop by Fuad Youssef. As we all know, information is everywhere and data science is very helpful in all aspects of our life. So our next guest, Fuad Youssef, will be delivering a workshop called AI 101 to teach us how to analyze data. And he has over 12 years of experience in data science, and he'll just teach us how to analyze data or in educational outreach. So he's currently a data scientist at RBC developing machine learning models that'll predict risk and provide business insights. And he also founded the Coding High, which is a Toronto-based training program offering high school students and professionals a series of AI workshops. And he's been a very active instructor since then. So welcome, Fuad.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, very good.
Excellent. So let me share some slides. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very excited to be invited again to Tech Under 20 Expo to talk about something I'm very passionate about, which is data science. So let me start by sharing some slides with you guys, and then let me know if you can see them. All right, are we good? Can we see them?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, perfect. So I'll introduce myself again. My name is Fuad Youssef. I am a data scientist. Like was mentioned, I work currently at RBC. Prior to RBC, I was also a data scientist, and I worked in healthcare, specifically in cancer research. 2 years ago, I started the Coding Hive, which is a platform that offers high school students, university students, and professionals with data science and artificial intelligence workshops. So the idea behind these workshops is that we bring people from different academic backgrounds, and we teach them, we pick one machine learning algorithm in AI, and we talk about it in details. So we explain how it works, and then we work together over a period of time to develop some AI applications and deploy them so that people can interact with them. If you are interested to learn more about our workshops, please check out our website. Also, feel free to email me if you would like to do any collaborations or any workshops with your high school, university, or any sort of collaboration with your organization. So before we get started, I really wanted to get a sense of how many people here know about data science. how many people here have heard the term data science before, or have talked to or know some data scientists? And I'll take any volunteers. If you want to volunteer and tell me, what do you think data science is about? Any ideas? Any volunteers? All right, maybe I can't see the whole grid, so I'm not sure if there are people raising their hand. But anyways, maybe I'll tell you a bit more about data science. So to me, data science is really a process where you collect a large amount of data, and data scientists, they do the collection, the data collection, and the idea is that we try to learn from this data. So we do that by extracting some insights from the data that we can use these insights to make some sort of decision. And those decisions we are making on data points that we have not seen yet. So we're performing some sort of a forecasting or some sort of a prediction in the future. Now, we apply a lot of skills when we do this process. There's a lot of computer science skills. There's a lot of statistics and mathematics, big data analytics, dealing with databases, large data, cloud computing, data visualization. And the idea is we're trying to take all these skills and apply them to produce a variety of products. So that's what data scientists do. They make products. And these products, they vary in functionality. So there are some products that are focused on speech recognition. There are other products that do image recognition. There are also chatbots. So chatbots are very popular in retail. Chatbots are using AI. There's also this big field of predictive analytics. So with predictive analytics, you are doing, you're collecting data and you're trying to do some sort of forecasting, whether you are trying to forecast stock prices, or you're trying to forecast whether or not someone is going to get cancer. And for that, there's a time series analysis, a very popular analysis that's used there. Or if you want to make more sense of languages or text and understand sentiment, there is also text classification that you can use. And that for that, there's also a very popular algorithm in AI that's used. It's called natural language processing. These are some of the products that data scientists work on and develop on a daily basis. But the one that we're going to be focusing on today for this workshop or mini workshop is image recognition. So with image recognition, most of the time it is using an algorithm, an AI algorithm that is very popular, very powerful. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It is called deep learning, specifically neural networks. So we're not going to talk about exactly how neural networks work, just for the sake of time. But if you're interested in learning more about neural networks and how to code them, please reach out, and I'll definitely be able to guide you in the right direction or the right path. The application that we're going to be working on today is developing an algorithm that will detect whether or not you are wearing a face mask. So we are going to, this algorithm is going to be using in the background deep learning or neural network. And we are going to be using a platform to develop this called the Teachable Machine. And it's an interactive platform that's developed by Google. The idea behind it is that it really shows you the whole pipeline, the whole pipeline in any data science project, which starts with data collection, using that data to do some sort of training, and then finally deploying that algorithm and turn it into an app so that customers can interact with. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this link. Just FYI, this particular exercise is going to require us to turn the camera on. If you feel uncomfortable with that, please just watch me do it, do the demo, and then I'll provide you with all the other alternatives after we're done with this. So the first thing I'll do is I will click on this link, and I'm going to click Get Started. So if you have the link, it's called teachablemachine.withgoogle.com. So if you can type that in, if you want to do it along with me. Also, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to stop me and ask the question now. So I'm going to click on Get Started. And then you can see that there are different ways that we can develop this application. The one that we're going to choose is an image project. So we're going to be using our images to help build this application that I was mentioning earlier. Now, in order to get insights or develop any sort of product or algorithm, we're going to need data. And there are various ways that you can get data. So big companies like RBC is sitting on a lot of data. All the transactional, the transactions that the clients are doing, every transaction is the data point. So there's a large amount of data that the banks are sitting on. Healthcare as well, hospitals have been collecting a lot of data over the years. So those big organizations already have a lot of data that data scientists can use to extract insights. However, if you are trying to build a startup, if you're creating a product or an algorithm that is so unique and no one has done before, you're trying to solve a problem that no one has solved before, what you will end up doing is actually creating or collecting your own data. Sometimes you might be lucky and you might be able to find some data sets online that are similar to the problem that you're trying to solve, but most of the time, your problem will probably be so unique that you're going to have to create your own data. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So for this problem, we are going to generate our own data by me turning my camera on and taking pictures of myself with different scenarios. So remember I told you that in this workshop, we're developing an application that detects whether or not I'm wearing a mask. So there are really two scenarios that we have to consider or worry about. The first one is pictures of me not wearing a mask. And the other scenario would be pictures of me wearing a mask. So let's start by turning the webcam on, and I'll take snapshots of me not wearing a mask. All right, so this is me with my lovely green screen in the background. I will press hold to record, and you will see that it will start taking pictures and it will count them. We're going to stop at 100, around 100 images. Obviously, the more images you pass the algorithm or neural network or deep learning, the better the algorithm gets at distinguishing between mask versus no mask. However, for the purpose of this exercise, we're only going to pass 123 images. In real life, you are going to need a lot more images to do this task. So in this scenario, we call it a class. We're going to give it a name. And the name for this one will be no mask. Good. So we have collected 100 images of me not wearing a mask. I'm going to do the same thing for the other class, but this class, I'm going to call it mask. And then I'll turn the camera on, and I will need to put on my mask. So let's do that. And I will hold to record. I will try to do the same number of images that I did with the no mask class. So I'm going to hold and record until we get to around 100 images, and then I'll stop. The idea when you're building these algorithms is that you want to provide, when you're doing these class predictions, you want to provide a balanced set of classes. So if we provided 100 for the no mask, we want to provide a balanced set by providing the same amount with the mask. Now that we have images, now imagine we can actually add many other classes. So another class that we can add would be maybe me wearing a mask, but not wearing it properly. So I'm going to wear the mask. So I can just add a third class where I would wear the mask, but I would expose my nose or expose my chin or just like put it around my neck. And the idea is you're just adding a third class and you're asking the algorithm to distinguish between the three. Now, obviously, this is a fun exercise. It's just showing you how we're collecting data. One of the weaknesses of what we're doing is the fact that we are training an algorithm to just take this specific condition, this specific setting, and be able to recognize it. What will happen if I go and change my shirt? What will happen if someone else comes and then puts a mask, will the algorithm recognize it? The answer is it all depends on the data that you're passing it. I am passing all this data to the algorithm. It's going to learn from this data only. It's not going to be very generalizable. If we want it to be very generalizable, then what we need to do is I will take not just pictures of me wearing a mask, but I'll take pictures of many other people wearing masks. I will take pictures of people wearing masks with different backgrounds, with different outfits. And adding that variation or that diversity will make my algorithm a lot better. It will make it more applicable to work with other people, not just myself. But again, this exercise is meant just to show you how deep learning works and how we can use data science to develop an application. So now we have 100 images in each class. All we need to do is press on train model. So in the background, things are happening here. It is doing a lot of stuff. So it's taking all the images, it is breaking them down into pixels and changing those pixels into arrays of numbers. And I'm not going to get into the details of the algorithm. We'll save that for another session. But the idea behind it, you can think of it as this. The algorithm is trying to ask as many questions as possible to try to distinguish between the two picture sets. So it's looking within the pixels, and it's trying to figure out if there are any regions within the image, specific regions within the image that you can find in one but not the other. If there are some pixels, some shapes that are available in one set that are not available in the other set. And that's the whole idea of machine learning in general. It's just asking a lot of questions to try to distinguish between the two images. And these are questions that we are not, as humans, feeding the algorithm, but the algorithm is going through all these possible questions and then picking the questions that are more important than others. It's trying to find regions in the image that are more important than other regions in distinguishing between the two classes or three classes or four, however many that we decide to do. So as you can see, the training part is complete, and now my application is live. So what it's doing right now is that it's taking, the camera is on again, and it's taking live feeds of my pictures, and it's telling me, based on what it learned, whether or not I am wearing a mask. So the process was very easy, very simple. Again, the reason why it was so simple was A, we provided very few number of pictures. B, it's a very limited scenario with very limited setting. The same person, the same background, the same outfit. So there was not, it wasn't challenging or difficult for the algorithm to detect these differences. Now, it's now saying, so it's now running this image through the algorithm that we just built, and it's telling me that I'm not wearing a mask, and it's telling me the probability or how likely is this an image of someone who's not wearing a mask, or an image of me not wearing a mask. It's saying it's 100%. But what if I put a mask on? Now it's saying that the likelihood of me wearing a mask is 100%. Now what happens if I kind of half wear? So it kind of detects there is a mask, 50% likelihood of a mask. What happens if I put it down? It still detects that there is a mask. Why? Because we did not provide it with a third class, like I mentioned before, that says I'm wearing a mask inappropriately or not the proper way. So that's something I highly recommend you do. Two things, actually. The first thing, I would highly recommend that you go back and try more classes. And then the other thing I would do is also I would try adding variation. So as you're collecting images or pictures, try changing the setting, try passing it different, maybe different people, and see how good would the algorithm be at detecting whether or not you're wearing a mask. Now, as I've mentioned before, there are a lot of details about the algorithm that we did not talk about, but that's fine. There are a lot of metrics and a lot of statistics that goes into it, and that's what our workshops usually do. They really break down each one of these parameters. They explain to you how they work and how you can change them and tune them to make this algorithm works better. At the end, what you can do is once you're done, you can actually just press export model. And if you are familiar with Python, which is a programming language that is used very common, it's very commonly used in data science, you can actually get the code in TensorFlow. So this is you'll notice that the code, this is not the code to train, but the code to do the prediction, that it's not very long. So if you can actually use this code and then run it on your own pictures, we'll show you again in workshops how you can take this code and then put it on the cloud and then be able to process your own pictures with it. But you can see that the process is not very complex. You're just reading in images, you're cropping the images, the new images that you take, and then you run it through the algorithm, you ask all these questions very quickly, and then you perform the prediction based on the learning that you have done. So let's get back to now this is done. If you do not feel comfortable sharing your pictures on the camera, there are other alternatives. So you can actually upload pictures. So you can go and look for pictures of people wearing masks online that are free and available, download them to your computer, and then just upload these. So you don't have to turn your webcam. So you can upload these images and then run this classification. Good. Now, you are thinking, what are some of the applications of deep learning or neural network beside what we just did? This, as I mentioned before, is a very powerful, very popular algorithm that has been used by a lot of companies, and it's used in a lot of products that you interact with on a daily basis. One of them is facial recognition. So DeepFace is a product by Facebook that uses deep learning and neural networks to create algorithms that do facial recognition, and they do it with very high accuracy. They detect the faces accurately almost all the time. Another application is Uber engineering is using it for self-driving. The idea is that you're taking pictures or videos of your surroundings, and you're trying to detect objects. You're trying to process the image, detect objects, and then the ultimate decision is, should the car move forward or should it stop? Should it turn right or should it turn left? Based on what you're seeing. Objects such as pedestrians, other cars, traffic lights, and so on. So you can see here, variation is very, very important. You can't just pass it a picture of one intersection like we did with just pictures of me. You need pictures of many, 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 many intersections around the world to be able to perform the prediction globally. In healthcare, deep learning is used quite often in trying to understand diseases. There is one specific company called Deep Genomics. All of these are Canadian companies that are based in Toronto. Highly recommend that you check them out if you're interested in doing something in AI space or data science space in healthcare. Deep Genomics does exactly that, and it uses next generation sequencing. So it uses DNA sequences and RNA sequences from patients to better understand diseases and rare diseases, to build biomarkers using the algorithm that we just talked about. And finally, before we end things, I just wanted to mention that what we just did, the algorithm, can also be used or has been used during COVID to develop applications that would scan X-rays or CT scans of the chest and use those pictures to generate a score of how healthy your chest is or how bad the lung infection is, what stage COVID is at, and use that in combination with other metrics by clinicians and hospitals to figure out whether or not you will need a ventilator and stuff like that. So it's been used quite often in COVID to do this type of research, or X-rays in general, or medical imaging in general. With that, I'm going to end this short workshop. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me now or ask me later. You can email me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in future workshops as well.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Fuad. Very interesting stuff that you showed us, and the applications of data science are very cool. We're basically can apply that to anything, right? So for our attendees, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Discord channel, and then maybe Fuad will be able to get back to you on that. Otherwise, we will be having our networking break. So we encourage the speakers and attendees to join in, and you will find the link in the Discord or in the YouTube description box. So we will end this stream for now, and we'll see you in there.
See you. Thanks, everyone.
Alrighty, so now we're back from our networking break. So next up, we have Joe Atala, who is a financial advisor at RBC, who is interested in improving financial literacy for youth. So he'll be talking about financial literacy and being prepared for your future. So take it away, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that intro. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what I do, and then we'll get into what we're doing today. So my official title is Investment Specialist and Retirement Planner. So on a day-to-day basis, I create and I analyze investment portfolios that are suitable for each client's different circumstances, because there's no one size fits all when it comes to investments. And then I create elaborate financial plans that hold different goals that a client has in their lives. So for example, retiring at a certain age with a certain level of income, or purchasing a property. And we link the investments and the saving strategies to those goals to see how close or far we are from achieving them. Now, even though that's what I do, today we're going to be focused on something a little bit different. So I'm not going to be talking to you about investments. I'm going to be talking to you about saving money. And even though that can sometimes be about investments, that's not going to be the focus of today's workshop. At RBC, we don't just care about banking, we care about making people money smart. So before I jump straight into it, part of the program that I'm in is called RBC Future Launch. That is the team that creates these workshops that helps the youth with financial literacy. We have different workshops such as Your Brand Matters, where we educate on how to create a good impression when you're in an interview, and other things. And so things may feel like they've come to a standstill, but learning and continuing can still continue. rbc.com/future launch at home has different resources that will help you in many different things. So it'll enhance your skills. There's different networking events, there's different experiences, and there's of course the mental well-being workshops. So you can definitely save the link and check it out, and you'll be able to scroll through the pages and go through the different resources there. So this is not going to be a lecture. I'm just going to be providing some financial tips. When you are ready for financial advice, the best thing to do is to talk to your parents or your guardians. You do some online research, and then go into a branch and talk to an advisor. Now, we're gonna get started. Most people like money, and some people like it more than others, but most people are typically on the quest for it. And something that a lot of people dream about is winning the lottery. Now, like me, most people are unfortunately not going to. But for a second, let's imagine actually winning the lottery and winning $10 million. Think a little bit about how you would spend it. How would it impact your life? There's different answers that I've received when I do this workshop in person. Some people say buy a house. Some others say invest their funds, go on vacation. Now, the one thing that everybody agrees on is that it would change their life in a big way. But what people don't realize as well is that it could also be a disaster. I'm going to tell you the story of someone who really did win the lottery and how they spent their money. Now, obviously, we changed the name, but this is a very true story. Her name is Sharon Terabasi. And in 2004, Sharon was a regular person, like this guy taking the bus. And she lived in Hamilton, Ontario, raising her family. And then one day she won $10.5 million and she became rich. She bought a big house, fancy car, designer clothes, went on a bunch of exotic trips, threw a bunch of parties, gave money to friends, and lent money to friends. Now, within 3 years, Sharon had spent half of her money, and over the next 6 years, she spent the rest. So in a total of 9 years, Sharon went from regular to very, very rich, and then back to regular. So can you imagine having that kind of money and then losing it all? Now, she does say that she's happier now than when she had a bunch of money and a lot of people around her, and that her life has more purpose than when she was spending money. But what Sharon's story tells us and what it shows us is that no matter how much money you have, you need to know how to manage it. So I'm gonna walk you through another true story with, of course, a fake name. It's about another regular person. His name is Sean Cooper. Sean Cooper was in the news because he used his financial savviness and dedication to reach his goal of paying off his $255,000 mortgage as soon as he could. That was his goal. Now, it ended up taking him 3 years and 2 months, which is phenomenal. I create financial plans for a living, so I know that most of the time we set the target 20 to 25, even 30 years away. So how did he do it? Well, he did a few different things. He worked 3 jobs. He lived frugally in his basement, renting out the top level. He rode his bike and he prepared all his meals. He also, of course, had to make social sacrifices. He wasn't going out all the time. And for sure, it wasn't a simple task. It required a lot of planning and a lot of discipline. But his reward at the end of the day was paying off his mortgage at the age of 30, which not a lot of people can say that they've done. Both of these examples show that it's important to remember that no matter what situation you're in, that it's important to save. But the thing that happens is that saving isn't always easy. So if we go through some of the difficulties when it comes to saving, a lot of things come up. For one thing that I hear a lot is the word FOMO, so fear of missing out. Everybody wants to buy a certain brand, whether it's shoes, whether it's clothes. There's a lot of good marketing out there. And you know that if you're on any social media platform, every time that you scroll, there's a different targeted ad targeting a specific thing that you've searched in the past. And all these things make it very hard for us to save. Even though most of us know that it's very important to do so, it can be really hard. And all of those little things that you pay for can add up. So if we take an example and we think about something that we typically buy on a regular basis. So most people buy lunch, let's say once a week. I know I do. I either Uber Eats or I go out and I grab something quick. Now, I once spent $75 on lunch, which was a pretty fancy lunch for me. I don't typically do that, but let's say that you spend $50 a week on lunch. Every single week, if we take that math, if we do that math, $50 times 52 weeks a year, that's $2,600, which is a ton of money. If you let that sink in, $2,600, that can be a whole lot of things, a new laptop, a trip somewhere. Now, of course, I'm not here to make you feel bad about spending money on the things that you want. This is just to show that how easy it is to spend money and how fast it can add up. So, and how fast it can add up. So if we think about some small things like buying a coffee, which is something that's a little bit more regular. I, for example, was at a point maybe a few years ago where I was buying coffee every day throughout the week. Anytime that I was on my way to the office, I'd stop at the Morris and buy coffee. So if we were to do the math again, and we take a number that's simple to use, like $2 a day, 5 days a week for a year, that's $520. So what I had to do, I had to take a step back and find a solution to that spending habit. So instead of buying coffee every single day, what I did instead was buy a coffee every other day. And so what that did was save me about $250 a year, $260 a year. So I was able to choose to do something else with that money because I had that option. So I'm going to walk you through a few mantras. So there's a lot of things on here that are very common. So you've got to risk it for the biscuit, no pain, no gain, actions speak louder than words. But for today, I want you to remember a savings mantra, which is save today, choose tomorrow. So the scenario that we just went through with the coffee, where I chose to buy a coffee every other day instead of every day, it gave me the option at the end of the year when I had that surplus of cash, that if I wanted to buy something at that point, that I'd be able to do so. So we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of saving. So there's a lot of common goals that people have in their lives. For example, buying a car, or going to university or college, getting married, buying a house, or having a child. So all of these things, they cost money. And if you're If you're not at the planning stage of getting these different things or thinking about getting any of these things, you don't normally understand, you don't really normally know how much those things cost. So if we go through some of these scenarios, the average that people spend on their cars across the course of the year, now I'm not talking about buying the car itself, I'm talking more about the insurance that you pay, the maintenance on the car, the gas that you spend throughout the year, is somewhere around $11,000 a year, which is a lot of money if you didn't save for it properly. If we think about university, which most of you know, it's somewhere between $8,000 to $10,000, sometimes more, and that's just for the tuition itself. Forget the living expenses, or if you are living on res. A wedding is actually a lot more expensive than a lot of people think. If we think about a 150 people wedding, the average that people spend is about $31,000, and that's a low ball. I've known people that have spent $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on their wedding and their honeymoon. Now, buying a house is another thing that is a very big expense. Now, of course, most people know how expensive it is to buy a house, or they know that it is expensive. They don't normally know how much it is. But if we think about the average cost of a detached house in the GTA, for example, it's somewhere between $730,000 and $1 million a year, which is a ton of money. Now, of course, this depends on where you live. There's some variables and some different factors, but it's still going to be somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million. So if you're not preparing for this, if you're not putting money aside for this, it's going to be much harder for you to achieve it when you actually want it. And the last one, which tends to get a lot of reaction when I'm having this conversation in person, is having kids. So the average cost of having a child or raising a child from 0 to 18 is $240,000, and that's not any sports or any activities. That's literally birthing the child and then feeding it and clothing it from 0 to 18 years old. Now, even if you're not planning to do everything on this list, most people are going to want at least a few things. So being ready and saving and planning for it is going to be the way to achieve it. So let's recap what we've discussed so far. What happened with Sharon? She won $10 million and she spent everything in 9 years. Sean, he saved and worked really hard to pay off his mortgage in 3 years. The savings mantra that you want to take away from today is save today and choose tomorrow. And then, of course, all the items that we just went through to understand that that you need to save to accomplish and achieve any of these goals. But to save money, you first have to get money. And so as students, there's typically a few places where you can receive income from. The most common one is a part-time job. There's, of course, pocket money or allowance as well, and then gifts. Now, there's a few different options of what part-time jobs you're able to get, and how they can affect your saving strategies or your saving ability. So I'm going to walk you through the regular and irregular sources of income. Our first example here, this guy works a few days a week and he works at a fast food restaurant. So this is an example of formal work. Formal work is when you get paid from a company and you get a paycheck and you pay taxes. And he goes to work and he knows how many hours he's putting in every week. So it's considered to be a regular income because he knows how much he's going to get and how often he's going to be getting it. When you have this type of scenario, this type of situation, it's normally the easiest option for you to be able to save because you know how much is going to be coming in and you know how much you can put aside. This next student occasionally does the lawn for her neighbors. So she rakes leaves, or she does the weeds in the backyard. So this is informal work because typically she's getting paid either via cash or via e-transfers. So there's no formal paycheck, and there's no taxes that are being paid. And it's irregular work because she doesn't know when she's going to be getting work. It really comes down to when her neighbors ask her. The next is former and irregular work. So this student works at a clothing store, and she's a relief employee. And so what that means is she gets a call to come into work whenever they need her to. It could be 20 hours a week, or it could be none. So this is formal work because she works at a company, and she would typically get a paycheck and pay taxes, but it's irregular because she doesn't know when her money is going to be coming in. And lastly, we have the student whose dad coaches in the local soccer team. And so she made a deal with her dad that every 2 weeks, that every week for 12 weeks during the season, she's going to come out and she's going to help set up the nets and help with the different drills. So he's going to pay her cash. So it's informal work, but she knows when she's going to be working. So it is regular income. Now, throughout my secondary and post-secondary education, I had a slew of different jobs. I did door-to-door in high school. I did door-to-door sales for driveway sealing and newspaper subscriptions. So that was formal but irregular work. But I also worked at grocery stores, which were both formal and regular, and I worked at as a valet, which was a little bit of both as well. So understanding the type of income that you're receiving is very, very important, because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to budget properly or save properly. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through a few different life hacks. So of course, a life hack is a strategy or a technique that's used to make your life easier and better in some sort of way. But what's important to know is that not all life hacks are created equal. So, for example, some of these following life hacks are probably not going to make your life easier. The one in the middle, his windshield wipers are broken, so he tied some string together and he's using it while he's driving to clear his windshield. Now, this is, of course, not safe, and you're probably going to get a ticket, so that's not going to work. And the one on the right, most people have broken their phone screens, so he thought it was a good idea to wrap his phone in plastic wrap, which again is not the best solution because you're going to have a bloody thumb by the end of the day. Now, obviously, these are just supposed to be funny, but they are real life hacks that can help you with your financial objectives. And we're going to go through a few right now. The first is pay yourself first. Most people have been on a plane before, and so most of you will remember the individual on the left who do the little demonstration at the beginning of each flight. And on the right is the mask that they always talk about that would drop down. So anytime that they're talking about this, they always say the same thing, which is if this were to happen and the mask were to drop, you want to put it on yourself first. And the reason they say that is because what good are you to somebody else if you're unconscious? So in the same way that you're putting your mask on first, you're going to apply that to your financial strategy, and you're going to pay yourself first. So what you're going to be doing is following the example that's on the right. So most people on the left, what they do is they get paid, and then they spend their money. So they go out, they buy stuff, they pay for their expenses, etc. And then whatever they have left over is what they'll consider to save. But the problem is most of the time, there's not much, if not nothing, left over. On the right-hand side is the strategy that you should be applying, which is you'll get paid, you know how much you're going to be saving, so you save first, and then the rest is what you use to spend, and then of course to give or to provide to charity. And another little tidbit that you can add to that pay yourself first strategy is to save 10% of the income. So a question that I get asked a lot is, how much should I be saving? And if we were to break it down, it does become pretty complicated because we link it to the different goals that you have in life, and then we then dissect it back to see how much you have to save. But to make it easy, and at first, the simple answer is to start small with 10%. And so there is a little bit of math involved, but it really is just moving the decimal one to the left. And so if you are making $180, then you're going to be saving $18. And so it's an easy way to get you saving. And to save a little bit more is another trick that I like to tell people, which is to round up. So if $18 was the amount, which was your 10%, then you make it $20. And I know that $2 doesn't seem like it's a lot of money, but we just did the example earlier with the coffees, where those $2 can certainly add up. So again, life hack number one is to pay yourself first. The next life hack is using the right tools. So most people have a bank account, but I get asked the question a lot, how many bank accounts can I have? So you can actually have multiple bank accounts. Now, I suggest that you start with two. One for your savings and one for your spending, which is typically called a checking account. So tip number one, or tool number one, is to separate your accounts. This will make it easier for you to save and not mix up what you're able to spend with what you should be saving. The second is automate. So I don't know about you, but I tend to be lazy when it comes to certain things. And having to go into my online banking and transfer money from my checking into my savings account every time that I get paid is something that I don't want to do. And of course, with the power of technology these days, all you have to do is log on your application and set up an automatic transfer from your checking to your savings. So every time I get paid, it automatically gets transferred, and it's not something that I have to think about. Tool number three is to nickname your accounts. You're actually able to do this with any financial institution, whether you're banking with RBC or anyone else. You're able to log into your online banking and give a nickname to a certain account. So if you're saving for something specific, so for example, I am saving to purchase a home in the next few years. And so I have one account that's nicknamed down payment. I did the math on how much I want to save. And I know that every transfer that goes into that specific account is one that is linked to that specific goal. And then the last one is block. So if you are having a hard time with any of this, then the best thing that you can do is open an account with either a parent or a guardian and make the account joint and. So what that does is it makes it so that you need two people to authorize any sort of transaction or withdrawal. And it'll help you attain that discipline if you're lacking it. Now, structuring your accounts is not the only tool that you have. The next is one of the most exciting things that I ever talked about, which is budgets. Of course, I'm joking. It's not the most fun thing that people want to talk about. And so I actually changed it in my meetings. I don't call it budgeting anymore. I call it cash flow management because it sounds a little bit cooler, and then people tend to pay attention a little bit more. But setting up a budget is something that can be stressful, but it doesn't have to be if you make it easy. It's as simple as understanding what inflow of money is coming in, so what your income is, and what your outflow is, which is what your expenses are and what your spending are. And then you write down what are the fixed expenses and how much you want to be saving. And that way, you know, as soon as the money hits your bank account, or as soon as you have the cash in your hand, how much is going to be going where. So if you were to apply it to this chart, for example, the first one at the top is the strategy or the life hack that we discussed, which is the pay yourself first. So let's say that you make $200 in a particular month, and the 10% of that is of course $20. So in the first bucket, you'll put $20 towards your saving. The second is transportation. So let's say that you are commuting to work and back, which I know most people, well, a lot of people aren't right now, but typically, let's say that's somewhere around $150 a month. So that's how much you would allocate towards that specific thing. And then you continue to do that so that you know how much you've allocated to spend on all of these different buckets. And it makes you save better for your future, as well as reduces the stress of planning for your finances. And then we have life hack number 3, which is not just setting any goals, but setting something called set goals. So sometimes goals can be so big that they sound more like a dream as opposed to something that is real or something that you can attain. So what you need to do is make them more real. And to do that, you apply this hack, which is 3 simple steps. So you see it, you explain it, and you time it. So I'm going to share an example with you. There's something that my girlfriend and I have been talking about for a few years now. It's a dream of ours. Well, it's mostly a dream of hers, but she's convinced me into it. So we're been talking for a while about going to a very nice resort in the Maldives. And so if we apply that goal, which has always been more of a dream than anything that we could actually attain, and we apply these 3 steps, the first is to see it. So it's the part where you picture the goal. She's the pro in this one. So she's on Instagram and all these other things, figuring out where she wants to go, what is the best resort, what are the excursions that we're going to be doing there, what type of room do we want, etc. So this is so that you can actually see yourself there and visualize yourself there. The second is explain it. So she's kind of thrown this one on me. This one is where you ask questions like, what's the best time to go there? How are we going to get there? How much is it going to cost? And it's the research mode. So the more focused you are on the target, the better our chances of actually hitting it. And the last is to time it. So choosing a realistic time frame. For example, we're planning summer 2021. Well, if COVID goes away, which we doubt is probably going to get pushed, but let's say that you're planning for something that is 12 months away and that you know it's going to cost you $1,000. Well, if you break it down, then you know that you're going to have to save $100 a month for the next 12 months for you to get there, or for you to save up enough to achieve that goal. So to recap, seeing it is the visualizing of yourself there. It's the Pinterest, it's the Instagram, it's the Facebook. Explaining it is the research mode. It's putting the real numbers behind it, the cost of it, and planning out the different details. And then timing it is putting a realistic timeline on it so that you don't get discouraged and completely drop the goal. And then the last part here, which is the last little bit of a life hack. It's taking advantage of something called interest. So if you haven't heard of interest, it's essentially thank you money. It's what the bank gives you if you put your money in a bank account that earns interest, and it's what you have to pay the bank for borrowing money from them. And so interest normally takes a form of a percentage. So, which means the more that you have in a certain account, the more interest that you would get, and then vice versa when it comes to borrowing or to taking out a loan. So if we were to take this example on the screen here, and you have $1,000 that you put into an account that earns you 2% annually, then at the end of the year, you're going to have $1,020. And there's an added function, which is compound interest, and that is where you're earning interest on interest. So with that same number, in year 2, if you're starting it off with 1,020, you were at the 2%. At the end of the year, you'll be left with $1,040.40. So again, even though we're talking about $20 and $40, it's the concept that's very powerful and super important for you to utilize throughout your lives. So a quick recap. It's not how much money you have, it's how you manage it. So remember Sharon with the $10.5 million spent in 9 years, which I think is a record, maybe. Sean Cooper, who's paid his mortgage off in 3. Remember the mantra, which is save today, choose tomorrow. Every choice that you make takes you closer or further away from your goal. No matter what your situation is, you can start saving today. Even if you're saving a little bit, it's better than saving nothing. And then make sure that you remember the life hacks. So pay yourself first, using the right tools, the different things that you can do with your bank accounts, and then set goals. So to see it, explain it, and time it. I think that is right on time. Thank you guys for letting me be a part of this again for year number 2, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was some very solid information that a lot of students, I'm sure, will find very useful. Uh, So we'll just wrap up now. Thank you everyone for coming to the second day of Expo. We hope you learned something interesting and got to meet someone new through the networking sessions. So feel free to continue using the Discord channels. And we will hope to see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock p.m. and details will be on Discord as always. Thanks guys.